Testing. All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to the Northern Mexico. I always screw that one up. Citizens Advisory Board, and we had a workshop this morning. I want to thank the people that were there, and so it's been a long day for some of them, but I think it was well worth it and time well spent with everybody. And I'm going to turn this over to Patricio. Oh, I need it. Wait.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board members. My name is Patricio Pacheco. I'll be chairing your meeting today. So we're going to go ahead and start off with introductions. We're going to go ahead and start off at the right side of the table with Joseph. Want to go ahead?
Either button will do.
Yes, Joseph Lorenzo Villegas Sr. I represent the Santa County area, also on behalf of the New Mexico State. Oh no, I take that one back. Texas Man of Yaqui Indians, and thank you for the invitation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Boyd Neisted, retired out of Bernalillo County, Albuquerque.
Hi, I'm Beverly Martin, and I'm here from Santa Fe County.
Hello, I'm Troy Thomson. I'm with N3B, and I am the Environmental Remediation Program Manager.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ellie Gilbertson. I'm the Deputy Field Office Manager of the Department of Energy Environmental Management Los Alamos Field Office.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Grindstaff. I'm the DDFO for EMLA.
Abby Hayward, and I'm representing Los Alamos County. Thank you.
Mark Hayden, General Counsel for the State of New Mexico Retiree Healthcare Authority. I live in Santa Fe, and good to see everybody.
Eleanor Bravo, I'm here from Sandoval County.
Thank you. So that wraps up our introductions for our in-person CAB members. Any of our CAB members online would like to introduce themselves?
Steve McLaughlin from Santa Fe County, retired attorney.
Thank you, Steve.
Good afternoon, Christy Green from Bernalillo County.
Thank you, Christy. Looks like that's all we have online for our board members. Any one from our elected officials online that would like to introduce themselves? Okay. So I did want to mention Lieutenant Governor Rene Varial is, Jamie Varial is on there joining us today. Thank you for joining us on the call, Governor.
She's a CAB member.
And also CAB member. Did want to just go overview of the agenda and look at what we're going to be covering today. So again, we're going to start off with our intros and call to order. With our old business, on old business, we'll have an update from Chair and Vice Chair from myself and Manny. Then we'll move on to update from subcommittees, and then we'll have other items discussed. At 1:20 p.m., we'll have a new business. Then we'll have a consideration and action on Chair's recommendation. Then we'll have it move on to appointment and nomination committee and other items. At 1:30, we'll have an update from our DDFO, Keith. Then at 1:45, we'll move on to a presentation on LANL Legacy Cleanup Overview with Ellie Gilbertson. And at 2:45, we'll move on to an update from NMED. Rick Sheen, our director here, and JD Nance, Bureau Chief, Hazardous Waste Bureau. We'll then break at 3:15. At 3:30, we'll move on to an update and look ahead from N3B, Troy Thomson. At 4 p.m., we'll move on to an update from EM Los Alamos with Ellie. At 4:30, we'll have an opportunity for our public to engage and ask some comments. 4:45, we'll have some items from the Executive Director, Bridget. At 5 p.m., we'll complete our meeting and we'll be adjourned. Looks like that's what our agenda is going to cover today. Do I have any questions, or can I have a motion?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second, Mark Hayden.
Great. So our agenda is approved as presented, and we can go ahead and move on to our old business. Old business is update from Chair, Vice Chair. I do just have a couple of brief updates. We did have some community forums within the last month, which were very well attended. One was over at Buffalo Thunder Resort and Casino. We had quite a bit of members from the public attend in person, and over 130 people attend online. And it was really well representative, and I feel like all the DOE, EMLA, SSA staff did a really well job representing and fielding all those questions. Over at the next public forum, which is just held recently, last Thursday, up at Sala Event Center, and that was also really well attended, and there was an update given on the environmental cleanup going on there in Los Alamos, which thank you, Ellie, for doing a good job out there. And that's all I have on new business. Any old business? I do not see any old business. I got an update from subcommittee Mark Hayden coming up and Beverly Martin on our consent order committee. If any of you guys would like to give that update.
Hi, the risk evaluation subcommittee met, and I have to say we really miss Elena, and I know she's on the, but she is very much missed. Our biggest concern is our discussion centered around, we still are very concerned about the chromium plume, and what's being done to resolve a path forward on that, and that was our main concern on that committee.
Great, thank you, Beverly. Moving on to other items. Mark, I'm sorry, Mark, before we move on to other items, we'll have another update from Mark.
I thank the chairman. Yeah, I do have a couple of things that we probably should talk about going forward, and that is the status of the litigation with the Environment Department of the state of New Mexico, and if that is close to being over, or we can get clearance to go ahead and rewrite the consent order. That's something that we've been contemplating for about 5 years. And the Department of Energy was looking into whether, because New Mexico is the only CAB that has a locus, a loci of a small area of Santa Fe and part of Los Alamos, to have the four corners of the state, like every other CAB does, to change our charter to do that. And I don't know the status of that yet. Then the last one was, one of the recommendations that we looked at was having this CAB reported to on an annual basis of all of our past recommendations to hear the status. And I look forward to that day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Moving on to other items. Any other items that any board members would like to bring up? I did want to thank Sterling as well as Manny for attending the spring chairs meeting on the other items. And that will move on to our new business, the consideration and action on the chair's recommendation, which Sterling and Manny attended. So on this consideration and action on chair's meeting, we moved forward to a recommendation, site-specific recommendation from all our advisory boards, so that's, which is what was discussed at the spring chairs meeting. So the recommendation put forward for the spring chairs meeting was that the board recommends that the NNMCAB website maintain and keep documents related to board activities in perpetuity. The documents shall be in a searchable, archivable online location available to the public. These documents include, but not limited to, recommendations, responses, and minutes. Any questions on that? Any discussion items on that recommendation? Looks like we got one from Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on that recommendation, or is it in the packet? Can I look at it? It's in the packet? Okay, do you want to comment at all on it?
It is in the packet, and it is a recommendation that was put forth by all advisory board members from across the country.
And is that for the archiving? Is that the one? Okay, all right, thank you.
That is correct, yes. Great. Can I have a motion for approval of that recommendation? As soon as everybody has reviewed it, of course. Mark, you got a question for us?
I do. I'd like permission, if I may, just to read that section that says recommendation, and
Sure.
then I'll make a motion.
Sure, no problem.
So the recommendation, and this is from the Kelly K. Snyder letter, I guess it's a letter or a memo. And the recommendation is, the board recommends that the NNMCAB website maintain and keep documents related to the board activities in perpetuity. The documents shall be searchable, archivable online, location available to the public. These documents include, but not limited to, recommendations, responses, and minutes. I move we accept this recommendation as a CAB.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have a second?
Joseph Villegas, I second it.
Thank you, Joseph. So looks like this recommendation, I'm sorry, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great. So looks like we have no one against this, so we're gonna go ahead and approve this justification as recommended. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and move on to appointments of the nominating committee. Any appointments for any of our committees that we'd like to? So we do have some committees out here that we're looking for some chairs and vice chairs. And we are gonna have a election coming up here in October. And I'm sorry, September, and our new elected officials will start in October. And this is going to be for our chair and vice chair of our Northern New Mexican Citizens Advisory Board. If anybody would like to recommend anybody or nominate anybody, please go ahead and do so. Okay, so it looks like before we move forward with that, we are going to need 2 volunteers for our nominating committee to gather some of our nominations for our chair and vice chair. Do I have any volunteers willing to reach out to some of our CAB members to see if they would be willing to run?
Mr. Chair, I would love to volunteer and help you with that process.
Thank you, Joseph. We got Joseph as a volunteer, going to reach out. Anybody else would like to work with Joseph reaching out to some of the nominations?
Joseph, I'm willing to give you a hand, and I'm trying to recruit people from my right and left as we speak.
Thank you, Joseph and Mark, for stepping up into that nomination committee, and looking forward to getting those nominations out for our September meeting, and we can go ahead and vote on those chair and vice chair positions. Great. Thanks all. So here now, we're going to move on to an update from Keith Grindstaff from our DDFO. Thank you, Keith.
All right, thank you, Patricio. Yeah, I just want to, again, I mentioned the workshop this morning. I really do want to thank all of you that participated in that workshop. Hopefully you felt like it was a good 3 hours spent. And I also want to, I don't know if Kelly's out here today or not, but Kelly Schneider also did, the DFO, did a presentation on FACA, which was awesome too, because I'm new to this process myself. So the whole thing was very well received. We went through their workbooks, and it was good stuff. And I want to reach back out to Bridget and Manise and Yolanda and say, I appreciate you bringing it back. And you mentioned it and said, hey, look, let's do a workshop. We've got a lot of new members this year, and it just made sense. So I know it's a long day for some of us, so there's hopefully coffee somewhere, and we can keep going. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Keith, for that update. And did anybody have questions for Keith? Joseph, looks like you have one for us.
I'm trying to get over the hiccups here, but we're good. Keith, yeah, I agree with you. I think the workshop was outstanding. I think we need to continue setting a precedence for doing that, for recruiting, for recruiting. But I appreciate that time spent. It was worth it.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph. Any more comments or questions? Looks like we have one from Beverly.
I want to second that. I'm an old-time CAB member, an old CAB member, and I thought it was very useful and very helpful. It was really good information, and I appreciate that you set that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Joseph, for that input. Anybody else? No? Great. Anyone online? No? Hearing and seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to our presentation on LANL Legacy Cleanup Overview from Troy Thomson, Environmental Remediation Program Manager. Welcome, Troy. And Ellie Gilbertson. Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, and again, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So we're going to be discussing just kind of a basic overview of what the Environmental Management Field Office and our core contractor, N3B, are responsible for in Los Alamos. And so that's an excellent segue to the first slide, which is to say there is more than one DOE entity in Los Alamos, and this is often a source of confusion, and so we have this nice graphic here that tries to explain this. You have 2 Department of Energy field offices in Los Alamos. One is for the National Nuclear Security Mission, and so these are the folks that are working on the pit production. They're working on global security. They've got capital projects and capital assets. There's science and technology development. And I would say in terms of mission scope, they are the large mission scope in Los Alamos, significantly larger than our mission scope. So the Environmental Management Los Alamos Field Office, so my field office, we are chiefly responsible for soil, water cleanup, and waste disposition, but only for legacy contamination. Okay, so there is a distinction. Legacy means that it was generated pre-1991, right? 99, I can't read. Troy gave me the look. That's how I knew I had it wrong. Ellie, don't do that. So when we're talking about that, that means that just because it is waste does not mean that it's within our scope. Okay, so this CAB circles and discusses specifically the legacy cleanup mission. That's what our focus is here. And with these two DOE field offices, so we are sister offices, we both have prime contractors, or in the case of NNSA, a managing and operating contractor, which is a very different contractual vehicle than how EMLA provides oversight for N3B. But those two contractors are triad, national security. They report through the NNSA field office, and then the other contractor is N3B, which reports through our field office, which is why you see Troy here and not somebody from LANL proper. So oftentimes folks refer to LANL, and they see it as one entity, and it most certainly is not one entity. So that, again, this purpose of this slide is to help perpetuate that clarity as there are multiple entities that work at the lab and work in Los Alamos. Generally speaking, LANL means triad. It does not mean any of the other three entities that you have up there. All right, so at the heart of what we do here, and see, here's our 1999, so that's great. At the heart of what we do here is cleanup. And because the cleanup of legacy contamination and legacy waste is chiefly not a sensitive topic from a classification standpoint, we are able to provide a great amount of transparency and public release of the information that we process. This isn't classified information for the most part. And so that is our chief mission, chief goal, is to be safe in our cleanup efforts, safe for the people cleaning it up, safe for the people that live around this area, so the citizens who live here, and safe for the environment. These three receptors are of equal footing importance to us as we go about doing this mission, and so we balance those priorities. And again, the scope comes from all of the weapons production from the Cold War and from World War II, the Manhattan Project era. So a lot of this waste is in a very unique state because a lot of this waste is pretty old that we're wrangling with. So I'm going to turn it over to Troy to give you a lot more detail on what our cleanup effort is. I'll come back later.
All right. Thank you, Ellie. A reminder for those who may be joined online a little late, I'm Troy Thomson. I am with N3B, and I'm the Environmental Remediation Program Manager. Thank you, Ellie. She's reminding me I need to advance slides. And we're going to talk about the N3B program. We're going to go through it, with a few slides. It's a broad program. We'll cover it at a fairly high level right now, and I know in additional topics in future meetings may get into a little deeper dive into some of these areas. But the three main areas that we do have for cleanup are protect water quality, clean up the land, and to ship waste off-site. With Protect the Water Quality, that is our groundwater monitoring and remediation programs. We also have a stormwater management program in there, and our surface and stormwater sampling and controls. We'll talk a little bit about each of those as we go through. As we clean up the land, it is investigations of remediation of areas. This is both in the surface and subsurface contamination. So it's not just right on top. We need to characterize and then be able to remediate those areas that are below grade as well. There are remediation of material disposal areas and monitoring of those material disposal areas. Those are landfills that have been used at different times around the site. And we have off-site shipment of the remediation waste. This is going to licensed treatment and disposal facilities as we generate it. So as we characterize the site, we'll bound it, and then we'll remediate by packaging the materials and then ship them off-site. Those two areas are predominantly performed in the mesa tops and the canyons that are on the LANL site. It is every mesa top, every canyon bottom, we're doing some sort of work in, either in protect water quality or clean up the land. As we get into ship waste off the site, you saw the bullet above on clean up the land. It's my counterparts in the transuranic waste program. It's contact handled waste that do the waste shipping for us. With that, we have above ground transuranic waste that we are managing and characterizing and prepping for shipment. Also have some below ground transuranic waste, and then we'll also have low level waste and mixed low level waste. A lot of that work is done in Area G at the LANL site, TA54. We also do generate some low level and mixed low level in the environmental remediation program. Let's go ahead and go to, all right, first slide here, protect water quality. Big part of what we do is protecting water quality. We're out there, we're doing groundwater sampling, we're doing surface water sampling, looking to understand the movement of those materials, whether they're on the surface or subsurface in the groundwater, and understand if there is migration, is there something that needs to be done? Do we need to build controls if it's on the surface, and keep understanding what is going on below grade. On that one, you'll see a surface water sampler, a gauge station. It's more of a permanent location that is sampling some of the water quality in Los Alamos Canyon. Many of these folks have a great office that they work in. You can see from that photo there. They're out collecting samples on a daily basis or performing other inspections. Stormwater. This happens to be a structure. It's a run-on, run-off control structure in Sandia Canyon. With that, we have requirements we need to meet, as with stormwater. If we have a significant rain event, we'll have to get out there and we'll have to inspect these structures. We're looking at them to say, are they doing their job? Have we had any damage? If you've seen water flows across the highway after a large rain, there's a lot of sediment that gets deposited, other things like that. We have to be out there making sure we have not had either erosion or structures have filled up that need maintenance as we go forward. And these structures can be fairly large like this. They can also be riprap walls. They could be gravel bags that are in places to control the energy of that water. And some of them here also allow the sediments to settle out so they aren't flowing down the canyons in these areas. We do have 193 stormwater sampling units and sites that are currently deployed under the IP permit. That's the individual permit through the Environmental Protection Agency. Do thousands of inspections of these control areas every summer during monsoon season. Hi. Another area of groundwater concern, and it was mentioned earlier through the risk subcommittee, is the hexavalent chromium plume. Currently we are installing wells. R76 is a groundwater well that is being installed, nearing completion of that well, and we'll have some more planned in FY25 that will start in October. We'll be doing those a little later in the year in October, or in fiscal year 25. But with these interim measures that we have at the hexavalent chromium plume, getting additional data, understanding that plume, all of this will support what we're going to do for corrective measures evaluations report, and ultimately feeding in to what a full-scale treatment system would look like. We do have an interim measure out at the hexavalent chromium plume. It has been currently shut down since March of 2023 and working through with the state of New Mexico for what it's going to take to get that back up and operating in the future. All right. Over a little bit to clean up the land. This is getting into aggregate area work, and aggregate areas is a term you'll hear from us regularly. It's comes right out of the consent order, and it's really the different watersheds that we have at the LANL site and how have we lumped some of those areas together into an aggregate. So there will be multiple the aggregate areas are into campaigns, and there will be multiple aggregate areas in these campaigns with the consent order. The photo you see there, South Ancho Canyon aggregate area, that's a specific solid waste management unit, happens to be an underground chamber. That is in a campaign that is called the Southern External Boundaries. And why are we out there? There's been past activities in these areas, legacy activities from operations at the site. And we are doing characterization of the soils. You'll hear it's called nature and extent. That is, nature is what are the contaminants? We need to figure out what's there. Extent is where are they? So are they on the surface or are they subsurface? We'll take multiple samples in a location. We'll start at the surface, 1 to 2 feet down, and 3 to 5, 8 to 9, and verify where those contaminants are, and that will drive our remediation pathways for these sites. By cleaning up the land, we are also protecting water quality. It's as that's remediated, those contaminants are no longer able to mobilize and move down canyon in these areas or off of the mesa tops. So key to both cleaning up the land and protecting water quality as we move along. As we get all this data collected from samples, we do look at it. We're looking at it for human health and ecological health, doing risk analysis. Is it going to be harmful? If it is, that drives what we need to do for remediation to complete that work. All right, material disposal areas, Cold War disposal sites. There's quite a few of these around the LANL site right there. You're seeing a photo of MDAG. You've got some trench there on the left that's been carved out into the tuff that's at that area, and you can see some materials going into there, drums, other things. On the right-hand side, you do have drums that are in a typical material disposal area in these trenches. There can be other materials that have been put into them. Each material disposal area is unique in what its use was, as it was supporting the Cold War effort. We are doing evaluations on these. We will go out and do vapor sampling at some of them, understand what we'll have for organic and tritium plumes underneath the MDAs. Also operating a soil vapor extraction unit at MDAL, and then getting data to support either future work plans or corrective measures evaluations moving forward at the MDAs. Project we've completed recently, good success story. Project that was called the Middle DP Road site. This was a site on DP Road in Los Alamos. It was within the boundaries of what used to be Material Disposal Area B that was cleaned up in past years. As a contractor was putting in a sewer line, found some debris that was associated with past laboratory operations. And at that time, we put together a plan for how would we attack that and work on cleaning it up. We executed that plan, which involved sampling again, identifying areas that would require remediation, and then remediating those sites. It was key. Some of the Middle DP Road site was adjacent to future housing developments in Los Alamos County, and getting that cleaned up so that the county could reuse that property, where this actual piece of property is zoned industrial. We do have 860 samples that were collected there from 289 locations. So again, with that shows you we're taking samples at multiple depths, somewhere 3 to 4 samples at each location to evaluate those. And we generated almost 6,000 cubic yards of waste and debris that was excavated, packaged, and shipped off site. So project on that was completed in Fieldwork was completed in July of 2023. The final reports were written and ultimately approved by the New Mexico Environment Department in February 2024. All right, we'll get into some maps. I like to have the maps on the board. It lets you show you where we're doing the work across the site. This is some of our recent aggregate area work. Middle DP Road, you see on there, it's right up near the town site. At the very top of this map is the Los Alamos town site. We completed that necessary remediation and then ultimately got regulatory concurrence and approval that had been completed as planned. Over to the left-hand side, there's the upper watershed. We are not currently working in that site as far as field work, but we have submitted revisions to a phase 2 investigation work plan to NMED for review and approval on that. We'll be working that over the next couple years, getting out to that site, and it's really getting these work plans in place, getting them approved, and once the work plan is approved, it's not necessarily that instantaneous switch that you flip to go out to work in the field. We still have planning we need to do. A lot of the environmental remediation work is subcontracted, so we'll have procurements that we need to do to get contractors on board to be able to perform that work. Doesn't mean we aren't working. I'm going to talk about what we're doing on these other sites here in a little bit. It's just how we're phasing our work, working in certain aggregate areas and moving into other ones. So upper watershed is one we will be moving into over the next couple years. Pajarito watershed, we've had a lot of work going on there. We've completed work at the 3 Mile Canyon aggregate area, submitted what's called an investigation report on that. Those investigation reports document all the field work that was done. If you look at the consent order, these are all consent order milestones typically. It will have a report that's coming in, and that report will go into NMED for review and approval, like I said. That report is documentation of all the work that was done, sometimes over 2 to 3 year periods. So collecting samples, getting them analyzed, evaluating that data, and doing remediation. Second bullet in the Pajarito watershed, we are continuing our investigation and remediation at the Starmer Upper Pajarito aggregate area, and that's, so far we have collected, going on 2,000 samples at that location. Lower Pajarito Canyon aggregate area, we're out in there collecting samples right now, mobilized out on that a few months ago and working through it, and then also collected almost 3,500 samples from the 2 Mile Canyon aggregate area. That was about 1,000 samples over what we'd originally planned for what we're going to do. As we identify areas where we may need to step out and get additional samples, we step out and we go get those samples. We need to bound those areas and know what needs remediated. If it's not just executing the plan verbatim. We get the data back and we decide, do we need to take some additional samples? Southern external boundaries, South Ancho Canyon was the photo you saw earlier down in southern external boundaries. We have completed work at North Ancho Canyon aggregate area, and that was a phase 2 investigation report. We are continuing investigations and remediations at Petrillo and Fence Canyon aggregate area. And also we're in Chicawee Canyon aggregate area doing soil sampling, and Chicawee Canyon should complete within next few weeks, within August sometime, for what we're doing for investigation there. Next slide will get us into MDAs. We'll start at the top again, up near the town site in Tech Area 21. That'll be TA 21. It's Material Disposal Area T. We are conducting vapor monitoring at that location. We had originally proposed a single sample at MDAT, and New Mexico Environment Department felt more comfortable if we'd collect a few rounds on samples through the seasons on that. So we are going to collect 4 samples on that. That'll wrap up next year with that sampling, and we will prepare an investigation report in 2025. MDA-A, also at TA 21. We've developed work plans for it. We're executing those right now. We're going to be filling data gaps by collecting some vapor samples again, and we will have an investigation report that will be prepared and submitted to the New Mexico Environment Department this year as a consent order milestone. MDA-L does have a vapor plume underneath it. We are continuing to monitor that plume. We don't see a a lot of changes in that. We've seen some change over time after what was called the soil vapor extraction unit was operated in the center of that plume. We continue to monitor it, and through agreements with New Mexico Environment Department from input by other stakeholders, we are operating those units again. Turned them on this last spring. They're currently shut down as we do sampling, but we will be operating them again in the fall, and that'll be indicative of is there changes going on with that vapor plume. MDAH, in 2023, a corrective measures evaluation report was submitted to NMED. Our corrective measures evaluation reports evaluate different corrective measures that could be implemented for these MDAs. As those are evaluated, we recommend a preferred alternative for remediation, but that is ultimately reviewed by NMED, and they'll issue a statement of basis on that after they've completed their reviews. Similar with MDAC, that's had a corrective measures evaluation report that was submitted in June of 2021. Again, it evaluated alternatives. We provided a recommended alternative for that remediation. The New Mexico Environment Department has issued their statement of basis, and then there were requests for a public hearing, and those public hearings are in the process of being scheduled. I'll let Rick or JD speak on that any more than that. We're awaiting that period. All right, as we get into ship waste off-site, you can see some true packs moving down the highway there. But it's shipping waste to our off-site repositories. It is foundational to what we need to do to get legacy contamination out of Los Alamos. The areas we are doing that in predominantly are CH True, our contact handled True department at Tech Area 54, Area G, and that will be mixed waste, low-level waste, and also transuranic waste that we have going out of there. From the ER, environmental remediation side of the house, it's mainly a low-level, mixed low-level, and we may get into some other industrial or hazardous waste at times. All right, this is a storage unit at Area G, and these are true waste drums that are stored in Dome 232. These will be stored here. We do routine inspections on them, make sure they're okay. It's also inspecting the dome, making sure that dome is in good shape for storing these containers. As we move along, these containers will go through various processes to validate contents, make sure they do not have any prohibited items for any of the disposal areas they may go to, and if necessary, remove those items or do other operations on them. Also getting good characterization data for the radionuclides, making sure they are true waste. We have a limited amount of space in a true waste repository. We want to make sure the waste that goes there is transuranic waste. If it's not, it could be clearly classified as a low-level or a mixed low-level waste. That goes to a different licensed disposal area. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a home, it just means we don't need to use that limited space. We've got other options that have larger inventories that we can ship to. All right, key project we have been working for a while is called corrugated metal pipes. These can be both transuranic and or low level. It's usually one or the other on those. These corrugated metal pipes have been buried at Area G since the 80s. Of note, they were generated at Technical Area 21 originally back in the 70s. In the 80s, they were transported to CH True and put into a safe underground storage there. Now, as part of the legacy mission, we are retrieving these. They're 20-foot long, corrugated metal pipes. They're large, they're full of concrete, cemented radiological waste. As they come out of the ground, we're transferring them into one of the domes that you saw there where the drums were. It's got a treatment unit in it. It's called a permacon, but it's basically a structure where we can move these corrugated metal pipes into and size reduce them. So they're being sized reduced so they will fit in a solid waste box that can then be shipped to the waste isolation pilot plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico. The 20-foot length that we have currently is not compatible with that storage there. So we do have 158 of them total to retrieve and size reduce. We've retrieved 124 and size reduced 84 to date, as of yesterday anyway. That was the current inventory. Some of our low-level and mixed low-level waste containers that are at technical area 54. You can see they can be drums, they can be boxes. That container right in the front there is what we would call a super sack. It's an IP1 container. It's just IP1 is a nomenclature for industrial packaging, but it's approved containers for the materials that it's in. During fiscal year 24, we do have a goal to get rid of the legacy containers at Area G. That is 451 containers stored above ground that are remaining. Of note, there was 1,883, almost 1,900 containers at the start of the contract, and we have 113 of those 451 remaining. So we're making good progress on that and getting that waste off the LANL site. All right, since we've started this contract, N3B took over April 30th of 2018, and these numbers are through June of 2024. We've shipped a lot of waste off-site. It's 18,241 cubic meters. So 18,000 is a big number, and a lot of us don't deal in cubic meters every day. It's not something we just relate to. So how do we try to relate that? Well, most of us know what the size of a football field is. Whether we've been there for a football game, marching band, most of them usually have a track around them. There's some reason we have lots of times been to one. That would be filling up that football field, including the end zones, to a height of 11 feet. That would be what you'd have for waste materials that are out there. And for reference, the bottom of goalposts are 10 feet high. So gives you an idea of what that would look like on a football field. Or if you want to relate it to 55-gallon drums, we're up around almost 90,000 55-gallon drums that would have to be shipped out at some point. What does that look like for the different type of materials we generate? Transuranic waste, those are your long-lived transuranic radionuclides, 575 cubic meters. For our low-level and mixed low-level waste, 13,500 cubic meters. Low-level waste has a radiological component to it that classifies it as that. It needs to go to a licensed landfill for low-level materials. Mixed low-level waste means it's got a radiological component and also a hazardous component to it. That can require different landfills that it may have to go to, but they are also licensed for those materials. Hazardous waste, we've generated almost 300 cubic meters, and that is what it means. It's got just the hazardous component. Other wastes, these can be industrial waste, almost 3,900 cubic meters that have been generated through June. Of note down there, we can also generate water. That does not include any water we have to ship off-site. We occasionally have to do that. Our wells, specifically, let's look at the hexavalent chromium plume. They may have some chromium in them. That's what we're there to sample. We can treat that through systems that we have on site there, batch treatment systems. And as we sample it, if it's clean, we may be able to land apply that waste. Other areas where we sample, there may be something in there that means that water waste needs to go off site, typically to an industrial treatment facility. Ellie had already mentioned this. From our operational excellence side of the house, you can see a whole lot of different types of protective equipment that can be referenced on the bottom of the slide. But safety is our number one job. We need our employees to come to work healthy. We need them to leave healthy in the same condition that they came to work. It means we're going to be efficient in our work. We're going to do it right the first time, and we're going to make steady progress on our cleanup mission as we do this work safely. It also helps with our cleanup decisions and in meeting our regulatory requirements. If I don't do work safely, I'm not getting work done. And then I'm not going to meet the requirements that EMLA and N3B have signed up to with the New Mexico Environment Department, the EPA, or other regulating agencies. The other thing, as we plan our work, I mean, our first priority is those workers. They're the ones in harm's way. Everything I do to keep the workers safe helps keep the public safe, and it helps keep the environment safe. And all three of those play together. By doing it right the first time, doing it safely, we are jointly keeping my workers, the public, and the environment in a safe place. And I know I've got another slide up here, but that's going to be Ellie's talking point. So back to you, Ellie.
Thanks, Troy. So I have to turn my mic on. See, I'm out of practice, guys. I haven't been to the cab lately enough. All right, thank you, Troy. Really appreciate it. So this slide here is to give you a little bit more clarity on all of the steps and actions involved with the consent order where a CME is required. So not all actions under the consent order require us to go through the CME process, CME being the corrective measures evaluations. But for those that do, you can see the steps that are broken down here. So the consent order does contain requirements for investigation and cleanup, and it also provides enforceable deadlines so that the remediation achieves the desirable end state. It has requirements in it for submitting documents such as investigation work plans, investigation reports, and the final corrective measure evaluation report that you see up there on the very first line, kind of our end arrow there. We've tried to color code this so that it kind of helps you decode a little bit about this process. So when we talk about where we are in various processes, the idea here is that certain actions fall under certain areas within the consent order. So the stuff here in green is EMLA and N3B activities that we go through these efforts, and the stuff here in yellow are the activities that NMED performs. So fundamentally, we're responsible for the legacy cleanup also that is not included in the consent order. So for example, the transuranic waste, you'll hear us say true waste, that's transuranic. At Area G and the operations associated with that, there's some decommissioning and decontamination activities that do not fall under the consent order, but we're responsible for all of that cleanup, not just the consent order here. So we have two main types of corrective actions for the corrective action process that would come out of all of this. So that would be, and this is what is under the consent order. Okay, so this would be the solid waste management units, or SHMU, you'll hear us say that 10 times fast. It's a nice little tongue twister. And this is any discernible unit that has solid waste placed in it. And NMED determines if the risks of release there are hazardous waste or hazardous waste constituents, and this is irrespective of whether or not the unit was intended for the management of solid waste. So let's take a time machine, go back in time to 1970, and let's say that they've identified a location and they're burying stuff there, and they weren't intending for that to be burying solid waste, but we do find solid waste in it, we can still call that a SHMU, even if that was not the intent when it was buried, if that makes any sense at all. There are areas at LANL currently where that is the case. So those areas we do monitor the solid waste, and particularly areas where there seems to be like systematic releases into that, not just one-time spills. The other aspect that falls specifically under the consent order is something called an area of concern, or AOC. So you'll hear a lot of the jargon of SHMUs and AOCs. This is what we're talking about, area of concern. This means these are any area that we know or suspect that hazardous material or hazardous waste constituents were released, but it's not from a solid waste management unit. So you got solid waste and kind of everything else, which we call an area of concern. And also we worked with NMED. They've determined which of these also may pose a current or potential threat to human health or to the environment. And it also includes buildings and structures. So perfect example, let's say I'm operating a nuclear facility in the 1960s, and I have an old ventilation system in there. And the point of the ventilation system is to draw contaminated air away from the work area, but that contamination might have created a residue of contaminants on the inside of that ventilation system. So this could be an area of concern for us because it's legacy contamination that's within a building. It's actually within a structure. So not just the kind of beautiful landscape shots that Troy shared, there are also some less glamorous shots of pretty dirty buildings and other areas that fall under this. It's important to introduce into this discussion the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA. You'll hear us say RCRA a lot, that's what we mean. This is a federal law that governs the disposal of solid and hazardous waste. The consent order does establish the corrective action process pursuant to RCRA. And this is also consistent with the New Mexico Solid Waste Act and the New Mexico Hazardous Waste Act. So we have state legislation and federal legislation that provide a lot of governance over these activities. So where exactly is a corrective measures evaluation report required under the consent order? Because again, this flow chart that you're seeing is for where a CME is required, but how do you know when a CME is required? So a CME report is submitted to NMED that documents the results of the corrective measures evaluation. A corrective measures evaluation is performed to identify, to develop, and evaluate potential corrective measures alternatives for removal, contaminant, or treatment of site-related contamination. It focuses on the corrective measures alternatives based on consideration of the site condition, the nature and extent and complexity of the releases of the contamination. So let me give you some examples of things that absolutely require a corrective measures evaluation. These are things many of you have heard before, just to help contextualize. So the hexavalent chromium plume requires a corrective measures evaluation. The Royal Demolition Explosives plume, or RDX plume, you'll hear us say RDX, that's Royal Demolition Explosive, which is a very popular explosive compound that has been used by the military for a long time. That requires a CME. And then many of our material disposal areas require this as well. And these are locations that typically have like shafts and pits, trenches. They're all across LANL. And so we talk about them as one group, but they are not geographically co-located, if that makes any sense at all. So these are material disposal area A, C, G, H, L, T, A, B. And Troy had an excellent map that is in your presentation that kind of highlights where many of these material disposal areas are. All of those require a corrective measures evaluation. So I'd also like to provide you with a brief walkthrough of the corrective action process. So again, where a CME is required and what the respective roles that NMED and EMLA have through that process. So the first one is a RCRA facility investigation work plan. So this falls under, this is your first green block there. This is an EMLA and N3B responsibility. Here we detail the objectives, the approach. We provide an estimated schedule and an estimated work scope of what the proposed facility investigation work plan is going to be. Now this work plan, this investigative work plan, has to be approved by NMED. So the next one is the facility investigation itself. So first we provide a work plan that gets approved, and then we go execute that work plan in performing that investigation. So this investigates any releases, potential releases, site contaminants from these SHMOOs and AOCs, or even releases of other legacy contaminants that may impact the groundwater. So like Middle DP Road, for example, was not one of our identified things, but determined it was legacy, and so that entered into our work scope. So we performed this pursuant to and compliant with that work plan that was approved by NMED in that first step. So our third green box there is the investigation report. So you're noticing a trend here, right? We propose the work for approval, we action that work, and then we report on that work. And so this report documents the results of these investigations, as you would expect, and this gets submitted to NMED for NMED's approval, and it provides explicit validation as to whether or not corrective action activities are complete at that solid waste management unit or area of concern, including validation of any recommended controls that we put in place. And so at that point, once we have the approval of that investigation report, at that point, we would enter into the corrective measure evaluation process. So again, an EMLA N3B activity. This is conducted based on the findings of the investigation report. And in here is when NMED notifies DOE that a CME is going to be required. So in this third green box on the very top, that's when that CME determination is made. So this identifies, the corrective measures evaluation report identifies, develops, evaluates potential corrective measures, alternatives, and it also proposes treatment options. It focuses on the potential corrective measures alternatives based on consideration of the site conditions, and as we mentioned before, the nature and extent. So the evaluation of the potential corrective measures alternatives, they do involve things like threshold criteria, balancing criteria, and EPA terminology that helps provide you with a bright line for cleanup guidance. So this results in, so we perform that evaluation, that CME. This results in a report. We're the government. We're really good at writing lots of reports. This is what we do. So this results in a report, and this documents the end state of the CME, and it does include what Department of Energy's recommendation is for the final disposition of that. So that gets provided to NMED, and then you see we move to this yellow line at that point. So now let's talk about what that whole process entails once it hits NMED. So first, again, we've got to review that report that we've authored. And after they have concluded with their review, they issue a statement of basis. You heard Troy mention this a little bit earlier in the presentation. The statement of basis is prepared as a response to the CME report, particularly given that the CME report includes a recommendation from the Department of Energy within it. It describes the basis within the statement of basis. It describes why NMED is coming to the conclusions that they're coming to for the selection of the final remedy. And it has to provide sufficient detail that the public and DOE, that we can understand and be able to provide comments to NMED on the recommended decisions in that remedy. And it also should provide a basis for like the studies and the conclusions that NMED has performed leading up to that ultimate decision and remedy proposal. At that point, you enter into a public comment period. So NMED will issue the statement of basis for public comment. The public comment period is generally at least 60 days. And NMED provides an opportunity for a public hearing on these as well. So at that point, all interested persons, members of the public, will be given a reasonable chance to submit data or information pertaining to this. Or they have an opportunity at the public hearing to provide an oral statement or a written statement, and it gives NMED an opportunity to look at any witnesses and testifying at the hearing. If there is a public hearing, then the comment period is automatically extended until the closure of the hearing. So let's say we're unable to get the hearing scheduled within 60 days, and instead it's gonna get pushed out 90 days. Well, now the public comment period is extended to 90 days. So that caveat is in there. Upon careful consideration of the public comment period, NMED will select a final remedy and issue that response both to the public comments, to anybody who provided comments, within 90 days or when it's appropriate after the end of the commenting period. And again, NMED is selecting that remedy based on the information presented in DOE's CME report, data from previous investigation reports, and information that they gained during the public commenting period. So it's not just Department of Energy's feedback, it's also the public feedback that gets considered into that. So the remedy that NMED selects has to meet, remember I said that there's all these kind of EPA guidelines that provide this bright line for expectations. So NMED has to meet that as well, and those would be the threshold criteria, and they also have to consider balancing criteria when selecting that final remedy. So then, once the remedy is selected, now we're going to move back into the green bar that's on the very bottom. Now we're going back to EMLA and 3B activities here. Once that is selected, that is when you start seeing the planning, design, of construction, you see the operations kicking off, maintenance is kicking in, and we begin monitoring and begin actioning the remedy that was selected by NMED. Now, this is the planning phase. Again, you see we plan, we execute, we report. So this plan for how we're going to go about achieving this desired remedy also is approved by NMED. And again, you see these checks and balances in there so that at each step of the way, we're working in parallel to make sure that there's consistency. So then after that plan is approved, we go off and do it. Begin our cleanup effort. Not a lot to say there, we go do it. And then when we're done with the cleanup effort, again, we issue a final report on this, and this is the corrective measures implementation report. And this is where we provide the documents of implementation and completion to NMED, showing that we have actioned all of these things and have completed the corrective measures. The final aspect, so the CMI, corrective measures and implementation report, this gets transmitted to NMED for their approval, and the final action in the process before we can call this sucker closed is a certificate of completion that is issued to the department by NMED, by the state. So that was quite a bit to digest there, but wait, there's more. I know you all were looking forward to that. So as I've alluded to several times, sometimes the CME is not required. So what that becomes is, as we saw in this previous slide here, it really just becomes this top line, okay? And so rather than going to the corrective measures evaluation report, if you go back to slide 19 here, when we submit the facility investigation report that NMED approves, instead of the corrective measures evaluation report, NMED will just issue us a certificate of completion because we don't have to do all of the additional corrective measures evaluations. So there are some examples in which we have not required a CME or one is not required. So for example, many of the aggregate areas, some of the canyons and watersheds from the legacy operations, those have not required a CME. When it is not required, this is the totality of the process. So it's clearly it's a faster process when those are not required. But anyway, this gives you the general overview of the consent order and the corrective action process that comes through, as well as the various roles and responsibilities. It's probably a little more intricate than I think many of you have seen, but this is why there's such a nuance between the relationship between the state and the department is because we have this interface with one another at pretty much every step of this process. So that's why it's very important that we have that good sync up. So our final topic that Troy and I wanted to share with you all is that EMLA continues to remain engaged in public engagements. We have a number of mechanisms that we do the public engagement. As Patricio mentioned, we had an EM cleanup forum last Thursday. And then you see here, this is the EM cleanup forum before that, where John Roderick was able to participate. And I actually thought this was a very good cleanup forum personally. And so we continue to get out into the public, and there's a number of opportunities to come and participate in the public engagement. So that wraps up what we had to share with you all today.
Great, thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Troy, for that wonderful presentation. It was very influential, that whole overview of that legacy cleanup and also the steps of that consent orders was awesome. Do you got any, looks like we have some questions here for Ellie and Gilbertson here, so we're gonna go ahead and start off with Beverly.
I have two questions for Troy, I guess. You mentioned that MDAB is zoned, on DP Road is zoned industrial, then how are you releasing it to the county for residential use?
The residential right there is adjacent to where MDAB was, and we were doing the cleanup. It's not, the housing developments are across the fence line from that in an area that had been used by the laboratory in the past, but all the historical records on that and photographs, it had been early days a receiving area. So you would have materials that came in on a flatbed truck, they would receive them there and then deploy them out to other areas of the laboratory. Then in the 50s, it was also used as a site housing. There was a trailer park location there where the actual housing and residential areas were constructed by the county. But right across the fence line where MDAB was and where a Middle DP Road project site is in an industrial area.
Oh, so it's not on the actual site?
Correct.
My next question is, how many drums of legacy true waste are being stored above ground currently? And how many do you intend to generate from the corrugated metal project, corrugated tubing project?
So I'm gonna help Troy out just a little. So I can give you an approximate number of our above ground inventory, but we can certainly have somebody from the N3B team get in contact with you for the exact number. But the approximate number is about 3,000 drums are currently above grade at Area G. And I'm sorry, what was your second part of your question there too?
Oh, and how many more do you anticipate generating from the corrugated metal tubing project?
Each corrugated metal pipe generates between 4 and 5 standard waste boxes. So a standard waste box is the 4 drum equivalents. So quite a few containers. If you take our total, I'm not going to try to do math, even easy math. But if we have about, let's say we have 150 and we multiply that by 4, okay, so it's about 600 standard waste boxes, give or take.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, for filling those questions, and thank you, Beverly, for those questions as well. We're going to move on to Mark.
I'll defer to Boyd since he's newer.
Thank you, Mark. Boyd?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, you two, for that presentation. I'm a little new to this also, so if my questions seem a little primitive, I'm sorry. But I'm trying to understand your protect water quality. That it was just kind of gleaned over. You have one picture, and you were talking about sampling surface water in Los Alamos Canyon, and I guess that's a monitoring station there. And then you have these structures that were built within Sandia Canyon for stormwater control. I imagine the first picture just has to do with naturally flowing surface water, and you're doing just regular water quality standard testing. and I guess this goes on to the next one, then you build these structures, and I'm trying to figure out where, why. You know, you just talked about surface water runoff. That happens all the time, especially during our summer rainy season. Are you trying to contain contaminants? You just talked about what sounded like, you know, just dirt and the like, but I imagine you're testing for radionuclides, volatile organic compounds. I have no idea.
Yeah, so let me, from a surface water, storm water standpoint, we are doing both. We will sample base flow as part of the surface water program, so that's the flowing waters you'll see. Even if you have flowing waters up gradient in a canyon, it may not be flowing down further. It may take a rain event to get that, and we'll have gauge stations down there as well. There's multiple locations for those. Then also the stormwater runoff. That was the 193 stormwater sites we have at various places around there. And from the structures, you are correct. Some of those structures are built specifically to reduce that water flow and let some contaminants settle out. That's an example of a large structure. We don't have that many of those. After the fires that happened years ago in the early 2000s, there was potential that you could, since you don't have as much vegetation and roots to hold that water back from flow, similar to the flooding you've seen in Ruidoso this year, there was potential you could have large amounts of runoff, actually make it to the Rio Grande in a monsoon season. So right on the highway, there was a structure built called the LA Canyon Weir, and that allowed the sediments to settle out there, water to go over the top. We'd still sample that water, but your flows, if you have contaminants, are usually in the sediments, and letting them settle out there was a method to make sure it didn't flow further downstream.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are you trying to contain all sediment flow from the mesa? Or, I mean, I don't understand. Are you trying to stop natural flow? Are you trying to contain only what's coming off of the LANL site?
In areas where we have known contamination that we want to retain, we will have these to collect the sediment flow, or the sediment. The water will still flow out of there. Other areas, we are monitoring it to make sure that there is not a contaminant issue on there. We get a lot of clean samples back from our surface water and stormwater program, and that is meaning there is no radionuclides, no organics, no hazardous materials, other constituents. But you have to monitor to make sure that you aren't having any release off of LANL property.
So monitoring flow from man-made activities, not
Correct.
just natural activities.
Correct, and you get other contaminants that can come into your systems that we have to look at. We will have exceedances from parking lots. We've got a lot of water that flows off of our parking lots into the canyons there from the town site even. So we are looking at those, and we are not seeing increasing trends. Sometimes we will have an exceedance on something, but we aren't seeing it keeping on going up, and it may be coming off of areas that have been developed not as part of LANL operations on the surface and stormwater side as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Boyd. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to connect some dots, and I remember going through a tour of Los Alamos and seeing some large containers, and items were put in there for then off-site shipping. And my question, going back to the page 17 with the 18,000 containers of waste shipped, or cubic meters, how much of that is pre-1971 legacy waste?
All of it. That's our scope of cleanup.
Okay.
But that would be pre-1999. I think you said 71 there. So all that would be before 1999.
But to your point, Mark, that is all within EM scope.
And speaking of scope, would that be within the scope of the cab?
Yes.
So when it gets shipped 300 some miles to, let's say, WIP, that would be part of it, right?
The CAB's current jurisdiction covers northern New Mexico. It does not
So if
cover
it leaves a
southern New
certain
Mexico.
border area, we no longer observe it.
It falls under, so there's two different mechanisms. So first of all, the moment it leaves our facility site, so the facility boundary, that falls under Department of Transportation jurisdiction. And we have some safety documents that we interface with the Department of Transportation. And so while it's en route from Los Alamos to Carlsbad, that's DOT, once it crosses into the facility border of Carlsbad, that falls under the Carlsbad Field Office jurisdiction there at WIP.
No CAB. Citizens Advisory Board does not look at any of that.
This Citizens Advisory Board does not. I have no knowledge of any other groups down in Carlsbad that are looking at it, but this group here does not evaluate that, no.
Okay, and I'm trying to connect some other dots here. And with regard to the hexavalent chromium plume, I noticed on the map, this was on page 11 and 12, there's a characterization campaign, and I'm assuming that's the chromium plume?
Correct. That's the correct chromium interim measure and characterization campaign. So the interim measure is the treatment unit that has been out there, and the characterization campaign is the additional wells we are putting in. We have a good idea of the boundaries of the hexavalent chromium plume. There is more data. We need to fill in some data gaps on that.
And if I understand last, and I don't know what's happened since then, there was a crew from Savannah River that was going to review the project, in part because part of the remediation plan initially proposed was to extract it and then inject it back in the ground and have this hydro wall. And my question to Ike White was, hey, does anybody know this stuff works? And he says, no, it's a technical question, I have no idea, and nobody's really come back to me with an answer. And so the question is, did Savannah determine that that was a good approach to it? What do we know?
So let me kind of revise. I'd be surprised if Ike White made a statement like that, just knowing,
Well, it's on
knowing what I
record.
know about Ike. But I think the heart of your question, we have an independent technical review team, and this is being supported by the network of labs. This review team was jointly appointed by NMED and DOE in order to evaluate that very question, among some other questions. And we're very much looking forward to the conclusion of that review team's effort. It's ongoing right now. And we see that as a very healthy activity and an excellent step in, I think, you know, if I mentioned during the whole CME process, you see all these back and forths. Our two departments have to be able to communicate effectively for that process to be effective. The independent technical review team is an excellent step in the right direction toward assuring effective and positive communications between NMED and the department. It's still ongoing. It's not concluded yet. And as soon as we have those results that are shareable, we will absolutely share those results.
Thank you for that. The next question had to do with the CMPs and the cutters, and that has to do with where are we in the process? Maybe that's an easier way to ask the question.
So for the CMPs, we are still retrieving some. There's 158. That means getting them out of underground storage. We've retrieved 124. And the cutter, it's a shear is what it's called, a hydraulic shear. And if you picture a cigar cutter that will cut off the end of a cigar, it's an industrial scale cigar cutter that will shear that CMP off into 4-foot sections. As those are sheared, then they are placed in the solid waste boxes that Ellie referenced, and they still require some more characterization to make sure that they are compliant with the waste isolation pilot plant waste acceptance criteria. So as that criteria goes on, they'll get certified for shipment, and then they'll be placed in true packs and shipped to the waste isolation pilot plant. So it's ongoing right now.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it was a pretty slick device, as I saw. You know, it's not like grinding through it where you get dust plumes and stuff like that. It's just a shear cut.
Can I add,
Sure.
that design was proposed by N3B. That's a novel design. Originally, the original design proposal was this diamond cutting saw. But when the workers that were gonna be doing this operation, when they got engaged, they were like, no, hold on, we got a better way. And so I think that's just an excellent example of that kind of engagement and pulling the workers into the safety process. This method generates significantly less dust, which means you don't have radioactive contaminants flying around nearly to the degree that you would have with that saw. So, sorry, I just.
It was
very
pretty
proud of
slick
that.
design. I'm happy to hear it's working. Next question has to do with a demolition project. And this, I think, is the building where there was an accelerator. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. It's
Yeah,
near
okay.
DP Road area?
I'll need to take that. That's not under N3B's work scope. But
Oh,
I can
it's-
answer your questions on that.
It's not a pre-1999?
So EMLA has multiple cleanup contractors. And N3B is our prime contractor. They're the largest and they have the largest work scope. But there are also smaller contractors that also perform work for us independent of N3B. And so in the case of Ion Beam, that contractor's name is Aptum. And Aptum is tearing down the Ion Beam facility. And if you're familiar with kind of the generality of how LANL is laid out, this facility is right next to the Ahmed facility.
And does it require a report be filed before the work begins, or is that not required under this circumstance?
I do not believe that's required under the circumstances.
Because there's no radiation, or why is it exempted? Maybe just so I understand that.
There's a lengthy process that goes into that sort of determination. I'm gonna have to call some of my friends to get a better answer for you than that.
I appreciate that, because I didn't see one, and I don't remember anybody talking about it.
Yeah.
And if it's exempted, I just need to know why, and if it's not, I'd like to ask for a report.
It's not exempted or not exempted. It's whether or not that process is applicable to the activity.
But determination's made, right?
Yes, at some point, a determination is made, but not everything falls under that jurisdiction. So
Okay.
I'll get you a better answer.
And then I think this is the last one here, so. No, actually, that was the last one. So thank you for your answers. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Mark. So next, I believe we have Joseph, and then I'll come back to you, Beverly. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Ellie and Troy, on page 12, that N3B Los Alamos map describing the cleanup of the land and the recent MDA's work definitely is a plus. Because when we went for the tour, I can actually, hello, I know exactly where those are. Because we walked boots on ground. We got to see all those sites. And then when you're talking about characterization and all that kind of stuff and how to do the, the framework of the cleanup process that you guys are doing, that map opened my eyes. And the other thing that opened my eyes was when we got to TA-21, I remember that spot. I remember very clearly because in 1988, as a security inspector for Mason Hangar, I was one of those security officers that was protecting that site from anybody from going into there. Even though I knew that there was some bad stuff there, contamination, so forth and so on, I walked boots on ground, so I knew exactly what the work that you guys were doing for cleanup, and it's commendable. Just to putting this and teaching us about what you guys are doing verbally makes a lot of sense to me. So I appreciate that. And that really is not much of a question, it's just more of a kudos for you guys because I believe in the science. And you're showing us the science, that it does work. So kudos. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm sorry, Beverly. We do have one more, Eleanor. we're going to go ahead and go to Eleanor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess Ellie, or Troy, either one. I'm just curious, I'm new to this, so are we continuing to identify legacy sites all the time? I mean, are we getting ahead of it?
We have a pretty good grasp on where all the legacy sites are. Every now and then, as we're doing something else on the mesa, we will find something. So I think the Middle DP Road cleanup effort is an excellent example of that. They were digging a trench for utilities and uncovered debris that had not been documented to be there and was deeper than what we would typically look for. So we went in and prioritized that cleanup, and that is very successfully closed. We're all very happy about this. But to answer your question, the majority, I'd say like 99% of it has been identified and is currently protected in some manner, or is being monitored in some manner. The thing about Los Alamos is a lot of stuff happened there. And so I'm not going to come out and say we have all of it, but we certainly have a very good grasp.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you're really good at writing reports. Do these cleanups precipitate or generate any recommendations for prevention?
We certainly do some lessons learned. That I think at the totality of the legacy mission, not specifically these cleanups, but we certainly do lessons learned that we share with like NNSA, for example, to make their waste pathways more efficient. But in terms of prevention, just like, are we talking about like preventing spills or preventing, yeah, so we a couple things is EPA and other big agencies, DOE is a huge player in this as well, have put into the legislation a lot of requirements. RCRA, we talked about RCRA today, that's one of them. There's so many. And those requirements impose a rule set on all industrial or even commercial entities, regardless of whether or not it's in the nuclear facility or the nuclear arena. And so those kind of started to come into effect in the 70s and have only grown more sophisticated since the 70s. And so with that in mind, I think the legislation is really what's kind of the preventive measure there is you're no longer just discharging polluted effluent into the environment. Now there's all sorts of conditions and constraints. Sometimes these things happen accidentally, but it's no longer the kind of carelessness, and I hate to use that word because I don't think they were being careless, I think they just didn't know. It's no longer that nature. So in terms of reintroducing these sorts of things into the environment, it is nowhere near the scale that we saw 75, 80 years ago.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned legislation. I'm curious about your interface with NMED because as far as I know, our New Mexico laws are woefully inadequate. Like our hazardous waste laws don't include radioactivity, as I understand. They include arsenic. So I would assume that we would defer to the federal laws. And then I guess I also understand RCRA it only includes solid, it doesn't include liquid radioactive waste or something of that nature. So, I mean, I think NMED has, and in my experience in the work that I've done, has kind of signed off on things that I feel are not in compliance with federal regulation. So I'm curious about how you interface with them on some of these issues.
So I think the heart of that question is one of jurisdiction. So if the nuclear material is stemming from the Department of Energy mission, that falls under the Department of Energy's jurisdiction, and therefore the state would not be accountable to that. That is the Department of Energy's responsibility. There are other agencies like the EPA, for example. The EPA has a lot of responsibility over like various contaminants, whether or not it had, you know, chemical pollutants, chemical contaminants, whether or not it had to do with DOE. And that whether or not aspect is really where you start seeing that interface between us and NMED. I think NMED certainly executes the scope that is within their jurisdiction, but I think that the question then comes to is who has the jurisdiction for all these things? You know, we're talking about only, I think, a very small sliver of the agencies and regulations that exist that protect the overall realm. You've got the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, so if you're producing nuclear power, they have their own. You've got the Department of Defense. They have their own jurisdiction and they have their own authorities. And obviously, Environmental Protection Agency has their own authorities. And then also other agencies like the Department of Interior might have authorities over agricultural use and agricultural runoff and contaminants that come from that. There are a lot of contaminants that come with fertilizers or pesticides. And many of those same chemicals you can see in some of the DOE activities. So how do you figure out what came from whom? It is an incredibly complex arena to understand who owns what. But I think to your point, I think the state does understand what's within their jurisdiction and they do execute to that jurisdiction. But we could all of us probably do better about clarifying those roles and responsibilities.
Okay, one more question, I promise. So in your flow chart here, you start with your work plan. So prior to that, how does the identification process work? Or maybe that's too long of a question for right now.
I can go ahead and take that one. So the identification process in a work plan, it will depend, you know, let's go to look at an aggregate area to start. We know the areas where we're at. We know where some of the facilities have been. We know what has been done there. We also know what some of the releases were in those areas. But we're going to go in, we're going to identify our boundaries off of that, and then we're going to investigate is the key part. So once we've got those boundaries identified, we'll be sampling at various soils at various depths, like I talked about. But we're also doing that typically on 50-foot centers. So every 50 feet, we're going to go out and we're going to take samples. And that data will inform us, do we need additional samples? If we drew a boundary around that area, and right on that boundary line, we are getting samples that come back above regulatory limits. Well, we don't say we're done. We say we didn't have quite the right boundary. Let's step that boundary out and make sure we've got a bounding condition for those sites that we know where we need to do remediation. Likewise, even within the boundary, we're sampling every 50 feet. Well, one sample may be we don't have anything where we'll need to do remediation, another one we do 50 feet away. We'll take a few extra samples to figure out where does this area that needs remediated end, because we don't want to just go out and strip mine and take all the soils out of these areas. We want to know where they're at. We want to be good stewards of the environment, and part of that is making sure we aren't over excavating in places as well. So it's really that step-by-step approach for how do you go in, analyze it, and then evaluate the data and ultimately do the remediation that's required.
Thank you both so much. It was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Troy. Sounds like we have time for just one more question, and we'll be back to you, Beverly.
I do have a quick question that came to mind after you were discussing the Technical Review Committee for the chromium plume. I remember that Michael Michelanis at one of our meetings said that DOE was absolutely committed to following the recommendations of that committee. My question is NMED also committed to following the recommendations of that committee?
So I know NMED is going to be giving a presentation here shortly. I'll leave it to them to answer that question. But on that topic, Michael was very clear on that. In the 3 months that I was the acting manager, I continued that strong stance, and we now have a new manager. Her name is Jessica Kunkel. She also is continuing that stance. DOE will honor the recommendations of the independent technical review team.
Great. Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Troy, for that presentation, and thank you, CAB members, for that engaged conversation. So we're going to move on here to New Mexico Environmental Department presentation here. We got an update from NNMCAB with Rick Sheen, Director of Resource Protection Division, and JD Nance, Bureau Chief, Hazardous Waste Bureau.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members and colleagues. First, I want to start off and thank you again for the continued invitations that the New Mexico Environment Department gets here at this table. I think it's important for us to participate and give you the confidence that the environmental regulators, at least at the state level, are doing their job and are constantly maintaining contact and moving through this process just as much as LANL is working on it. I was going to give you a rundown of the RCRA corrective action process, but Ellie just hit that one out of the park. She did a very thorough job, and even more and very helpful pointing out where NNMCAB's involvement is in the corrective action process. But before I hand things over to JD and introduce him to give you sort of current status of what Hazardous Waste Bureau is doing, let me just introduce you and the new members to what NNMCAB does at LANL. We have different regulatory engagements and entanglements with the labs, starting with one, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act permit, RCRA permit. That is what we do as our oversight of hazardous waste on ongoing research and activity and development of waste, of what could be hazardous waste out on the property as it is now, current stuff. Does not include legacy waste. Legacy waste is handled under what's called a consent order. The current consent order was developed in 2016. I believe, as much as I can say right now, we've been negotiating with LANL and DOE and other agencies for several years now. I think we're close to the end, but we still haven't tied a bow on it. But when we do, NNMCAB will be hosting a public meeting and working with LANL and sort of talking everyone through it and what's changed and what the improvements are for both sides. Within my division, the Resource Protection Division, there's at least one other bureau involved with LANL. It's called the Department of Energy Oversight Bureau. And that has been working and been in operation since around 2000. And it's a non-regulatory, non-enforcement group. They're doing third-party sampling of the environment, be it surface water, stormwater, air, and animals, and habitat around the labs itself. They also do that around Sandia and WIP. They get a grant directly from the Department of Energy, which they have, as I said, since 2000. So that's a program that we still, we think it's extremely important for us as a neighbor and to ensure, and it's a third-party overview for the labs. So I think it also protects them. Like, we can both say, yeah, there's no impact to the environment outside of the lab that we don't know. I mean, I think the better for all of us and for the community. There are two other groups in the another division, the Water Protection Division, and that's the Groundwater Bureau and the Surface Water Bureau. Groundwater Bureau is involved with discharge permits, and that, when you've heard about the pump and treat of the chromium plume, one of their things is they actually permit the discharge of the water that's been treated back into the ground. Surface water will look at surface water quality and stormwater permits around the lab that they mentioned. And I know there's many sites around there, and that's not my division, so I can't speak to that as much. But I will say, please note that you'll see JD's face here often. When you invite us, he'll come, but we certainly could open up to the different bureaus and the work that they're doing. I'm sure they're happy when I sit and invite them to more meetings to go to while they're not present. But some may be listening. And then, federally speaking, the Environment Department is involved with larger stakeholder groups, including the Environmental Council of States, the Federal Facilities Task Force, and what's known as STIGWIG, or the State and Tribal Government Working Group. All of these allow a headquarters and a peer state, meaning all of the other states that have DOE research facilities within them, like Tennessee with Oak Ridge, Idaho with Idaho National Falls, and the rest, Washington, Oregon, California, New York, Ohio, Kentucky, and South Carolina. That allows us, all my peers, the EPA, Department of Energy, and these facilities to meet and work together, and with the tribal entities around these facilities, and to discuss sort of the broader topics, everything from budgeting to what's the new alphabet soup of the decade, this time being PFAS. In fact, by chance, I was at a dialogue meeting between all the DOE headquarters, some of the labs, the states, and the EPA last week, and we spoke on PFAS, other emerging contaminants when it came to cleanups and baseline studies around DOE facilities, as well as complicated groundwater cleanup sites. Most of the discussion focused on some at Oak Ridge, but the chromium plumes on that list as well for us to discuss and work with our peers. As far as mentioned, the independent technical review panel, I'll jump to that. Again, that was Michael McLeonis, an idea of how we could, sort of get to this point where we were at a standstill, we thought, where it came to where we could go regulatory and where LANL wanted to go regulatorily speaking in our measures. So we agreed, and as Ellie noted, we did get an opportunity. Half the members were chosen by NMED. So I think our commitment will be to go with the recommendations with at least all the technical aspects. What we did ask questions were on regulatory aspects as well. And as long as we can regulatory do it, we'll go along with it as well. But with that, I'd like to introduce you to my new Hazardous Waste Bureau Chief. This is J.D. Nance. I was on a phone call today with J.D. Nance, which sounds like another name in popular, with a guy who sounds like who's Mark Kelly. And I'm like, holy moly, we have a VP debate going right now. But it was a good conversation. Either way, I'm really happy having JD on board. He has a lot of experience doing corrective actions at large federal facilities with many stakeholders and very convoluted sites, which JD seems to just have a beautiful mind for, at least an understanding of the RCRA process. And like anyone ever called me an expert, I was always, please do not put that expectation on me. But I think JD for as I hire people who are better and smarter than me, and I think I've done a good job here. So, hand it over to JD.
Thank you, Rick. Chair, members, good afternoon. Yeah, along with him, I have really good intelligent staff, so they are the ones that I point to when it comes to experts. But first of all, I just want to kind of go through an update, what we have going on right now. Start off with the consent order itself. NMED and DOE, we held a public meeting and finalized the FY24 Appendix B on June 5th of this year. That was held down at Cities of Gold. And the proposed FY2025 Appendix B is anticipated fairly soon. So we'll be seeing that pretty quick. Moving over to groundwater. We submitted a notice of disapproval was sent to the updated chromium interim measures and characterization work plan. We required that DOE propose an alternative location for injection as part of the revised document. The revised document was due back to NMED early in July. We're still waiting on a receiving of that revised work plan. As Troy mentioned earlier in his presentation, the drilling of R76 is ongoing. We approved that work plan June 8th of 2023, and that drilling's ongoing, should be done here pretty soon. The Pueblo de San Ildefonso, they decided on the upcoming chromium plume monitoring well, SIMR3. That one is located on Pueblo land. Their recommendation was to have that well be a single screened well. The proposed well was a dual screen completion. And NMED is requiring a revised document be submitted that addresses that requirement from the Pueblo itself. Along with chromium interim measures, that process has been shut down since the end of March of 2023. Currently, DOE and NMED, haven't yet agreed on that path forward. It's kind of back to that interim, for the independent technical review. Once that review comes out, we will then share conclusions and be able to move forward with that based on those recommendations. We are concerned, NAD is concerned with the potential impacts of the off-site migration of the chromium plume onto Pueblo de San Ildefonso lands. NAD previously required a DOE commitment to expand the interim measures through the installation of additional injection well as part of the conditions to restart the injection operations under DP 1835. June 7th of this year, NMED, we did issue a notification authorizing operation of injection wells CRIN3, CRIN4, and CRIN5. That was to facilitate the restart of the extraction and treatment of that contaminated water immediately. At this time, only required continued monitoring of chromium conditions at all the regional aquifer monitoring wells in the area are included to additional wells under condition 14 DP 1835. The potential risks to the groundwater safety and the contamination risks to the Pueblo de San Ildefonso that could result from lack of action outweigh the deadlock between us. So we're hoping that we can, be able to move forward with getting some extraction going on that. But we're still working on that piece of it. On corrective action documents, let's see, we issued a statement of basis for MDAC, and we did hold a 60-day public comment period with 3 requests for public hearing came out of that public comment. We are in the process of scheduling a public hearing and expecting to host negotiations prior to that, and with the hearing requesters prior to the hearing. So we are working on that piece, and we'll be getting the public hearing going here pretty soon. Let's see, LANL permit-related activities. On March 20th, the EPA proposed amendments to the regulations for open burn, open detonation areas for disposal of waste explosives. The proposed rule would improve the evaluation of alternative technologies for treating waste explosives in lieu of open burn and open detonation. DOE is reevaluating the permit application with consideration to that proposed rule. And working through that, we're waiting on what their conclusion will be on that. Kind of moving over to WIP updates. The WIP permit renewal, the permit renewal became effective November 3rd of 2023. Permittees are implementing a new permit conditions and are specifically focused on the legacy true waste disposal plan. An update on that plan is provided at the WIP Community Forum on July 30th. We do have information on that. They can be found at the Hazardous Waste Bureau WIP webpage, www.env.nm.gov, /hazardous-waste /WIP. So there's a website that has information on that. We got, so completed tasks. We had a Class 1 two-item package that was submitted March 19th, 2024, down to WIP. In renewal negotiations, WIP permittees agreed to submit 2 Class 1s. Item 1 was a revised text in the permit Part 1, Section 115.1 regarding tribal community notice and involvement. And Item 2, revised text in the permit attachment A1 concerning the flood zone designation for the WIP facility. Those were incorporated with the Class 2 and approval upon submittal. Along with that, we had Class 1 new fire water distribution system description. That was submitted April 29th of 2024. The update permit with some upgrades to the new fire water distribution system provided additional description of that, and updated permit with with the current facility layout. It also incorporated with a Class 2 and approval, and that'll be approved upon submittal. Class 2 two-item package, along with that, was submitted on March 29, 2024. That public notice was issued on April 2nd of this year. And the 60-day public comment period closed on June 3rd of this year. That included 2 items, Item 1 being an addition of new shielded container assemblies, and Item 2, which is the graded approach to the audits that are conducted for those. NNMCAB did issue a final determination June 25th, approving the PMR with changes and incorporating the above two, the 2 Class 1 permit modifications. So there are no permit modifications pending in-house currently. Update on the WIP shipments that have been received. This is from January 1 of this year through July 15th. WIP has received a total shipments of 260 shipments. That breakdown comes to 189 out of the Idaho National Laboratory, INL, up in Idaho Falls. There was 26 shipments out of Los Alamos, and 35 from Savannah River. Other shipments we had, there was 6 out of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and 4 shipments from Argonne National Laboratory. The Livermore National Laboratory in Livermore, California didn't have any shipments during that period. Pretty much that is the update out of Haz Waste Bureau.
Great, thank you, JD. Thank you, Rick. Welcome, JD. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Joseph, do you have a question? Oh, okay. So, looks like we got one question here from Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is for JD. I'm curious to know, it seems as though the remediation is poised to begin injection again. How did you understand that to be the direction? Is that something from a report or gut instinct? Where's that come from?
To start up the injection again?
What I gleaned from your conversation was that there's wells being dug to start up the injection. If that's true, why?
Okay. The guidance was to install injection on Pueblo San de Ildefonso's land, which is to build a hydro barrier and protect their lands and their water. We have in-house hydrologist and modeling that would show that we could do some protection on that piece of it. So it's not the injection of the system itself, it's more of an additional well for our protection of the Pueblo's lands and resources.
Thank you for
Could
that
I-
part of it.
Yeah,
What-
Excuse me,
Oh,
like,
sure,
if-
go ahead.
just to update, I would, the wells we're talking about going on San I are monitoring wells at this point?
Not injection wells.
not injection wells.
Yes, injection well, I'm sorry, monitoring wells. My confusion on that.
Okay, and then JD, you also mentioned modeling, and again, I asked Mike White what the modeling was, and he did not have an answer. No technical person ever had an answer. I've asked it about 10 times. What modeling is being used, and what will it be used for?
Yeah, we do modeling on the groundwater plume. So what you basically do, you've got some data that comes in from all the wells that you have drilled. Some of that has contamination with hexavalent chromium in various levels. You run that into a numerical model. It does a lot of iterations on that and gives you probability on what it is. We'll call the model calibrated. It is a calibrated model when it matches the environmental conditions. So in the wells, when we see contamination and the model is saying that is also what it represents, the model's calibrated. Now, there's still some data gaps because we don't have wells everywhere. So somewhere in between two wells, you may have to, the model's making an interpretation or an extrapolation of what that data is. So every time we drill a new well, we're drilling R76 right now, that is a monitoring well, that data will also be fed into the model, and you'll do additional computational runs. It may require some small tweaks to the model, but the more data you get, the less you're going to have to tweak that model to represent what's going on in the underground. It does take some time because these are deep wells. They're anywhere from 900 to 1,200 feet below ground, and they are expensive to drill and take some time to install due to that depth. But we do modeling on the system there.
Thank you, Troy. I've never heard the name of the model. Is it an NB3 model? Is it a DOE model? What is it?
You asked me, and Ellie might be able to pipe in.
It's called ModFlow. Is it ModFlow?
No,
it's
ModFlow
not
is an
ModFlow.
industrial standard.
See, don't ask me to answer these
So
questions.
it's not ModFlow.
It is not ModFlow.
There, just a second.
Did you hear that, Mark?
I did not. Please
So
repeat
it's
it.
Finite element heat and mass transfer model.
That's a mouthful. So it's,
I like ModFlow better.
say it one more time slower and I'll write it down.
Finite element heat and mass transport modeling.
FEHM for short on that. And it's, again, we got to say thanks to our technical experts in the room. They were bailing Ellie and I out there.
Bailing us all out, yes.
Thank you. And maybe if you could just modify, or I'm sorry, if you could extrapolate and say, has this model been used before, and if so, for what?
Well, finite element modeling is incredibly common in mechanical engineering for pretty much all applications, and it's particularly useful in fluid dynamics modeling. So yes, finite element modeling is like a universally accepted form of modeling. It's not a specific software system.
You make it sound like it's a routine thing, but has it been used for creating a hydro wall barrier to prevent contamination underground?
So the model won't create the hydro wall barrier, it'll model it, but it is these hydraulic barriers, they have been used routinely in other applications. It's not unique to the Los Alamos site.
And I've heard this answer before, and nobody's been able to tell me where.
I've got some documents out that we can find you other places on that. I don't have them right off the top of my head, but that's one, we can take that one and get you some information on where has there been additional hydraulic barriers. I do know it has been used where you aren't doing extraction before, but at the Atlas site in Moab, where there was a hydraulic barrier put in to prevent groundwater from migrating into the Colorado River at that area. But let us get a takeaway and give you some other reports. You might not get a one-for-one application in the deep aquifer like we have here, but there are other applications where it has been used successfully.
Thank you. I look forward to the information. Appreciate it. That's all.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Ellie. Joseph?
Mr. Chairman, Troy, as a layperson, to try to understand what the term model or modeling means, I get it. So thank you for bringing your crew on board and explaining it, just the process. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, JD. Thank you, Rick, for that update. So we are now over to a break-in session. If we don't have any comments from anybody online, which I do not see any. Great. So we're now going to break here for 15 minutes. It is 3:07 now, so we should be back right at 3:24. Thank you. Everybody back? Okay. Great. Great. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to go ahead and now get started. Here we got a update and a look ahead from N3B, Troy Thomson, Environmental Remediation and Project Manager.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick reminder for the N3B update. It's reminds you real quick of our 3 work areas we focus on. You saw these on our slide. That is protect water quality, clean up the land, and ship waste off the site. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of those as we look at our FY24 focus and look ahead. So true waste is one of those areas we had talked about, so that's the transuranic waste. We are continuing to ship waste to WIP throughout this summer and beyond. Through June of 2024, June 30th to be exact, we have completed 16 shipments to WIP, and we'll be continuing that throughout the summer. WIP did have its annual scheduled maintenance outage, and that was in the February to March timeframe. And really during that period, WIP needs to halt shipments. It's a routine outage to be able to do their maintenance and keep the facility in the condition it needs to be in. Corrugated metal pipes that we talked about earlier, we are continuing to retrieve and do those size reduction activities. They are going to remain a priority through fiscal year 24. We will be continuing those activities throughout the summer and moving to complete that critical project for us. Other activities that we have at Area G is to resume our drill and drain of some of the legacy transuranic waste drums. So drill and drain, that's drums may have liquids in them over time as they've come out of retrieval, and that's an unacceptable item. It's prohibited for the waste isolation pilot plant. So as those are identified, it's what it sounds like. We're going to drill holes in the drums and we're going to drain them. Just as complicated by the fact that we're dealing with transuranic wastes and radioactive materials. So we have controls put in place, doing those in what's called glove boxes and glove bags at times, where we've got segregation from the environment and our employees there. Also, a new project that we've been working on this summer is acronym for it is UDAS. That stands for Universal Drum Assay and Segregation System. It's a demonstration project we're doing. It's part of characterization. It's been used in Europe. It has not been used in the United States. That's why we were demonstrating it here. But it's a method for more sophisticated than our current technologies to characterize the waste in these drums. We do a farther away look at them, and it has some errors that can be in it, and so we have to be conservative with that. And we make sure that what we are doing has some, that conservativeness is making sure that we're we are not underreporting what those radionuclide contents may be. UDAS is a little more sophisticated. It'll take slices of the drum, report that out. So similar to like a CAT scan, the slices that you're getting out of that, we'll be looking at that for radionuclide content and being able to characterize that and be able to use it hopefully in the future to be characterizing waste drums and disposing of them at various locations. The other benefit of that is, since it is slightly more sophisticated, it will also put less conservatism into those numbers. So we may be able to have a drum be classified as a low-level waste easier than in past items. But before you can put anything into service, we need to be able to prove that it's working and giving us the results that we want to see and expect to see. Other work we've had going is our low-level and mixed low-level waste containers at TA54. Reiterate what I said earlier on that. At contract start, we had 1,883 legacy containers stored above ground, almost 1,900 containers. Our goal for FY24 is to ship the final 451 containers. Only 113 of those remain as we close out the fiscal year. It's going to be an important success factor for N3B, and we've got a lot of effort going into that. We'd also talked about our aggregate area programs. We are continuing our characterization there, and we will sample additional waste from the aggregate areas, and that waste that will be generated is shipped as soon as we can. It's usually within, a 90-day or so period. We're getting that off-site. We get it containerized, characterized, and ship it off-site. Majority of that waste, as we discussed as well, is low-level and mixed low-level waste. So this driving down of our legacy waste inventory is going to remain a priority for N3B, not just through this fiscal year, but in the future fiscal years too. That's part of our mission. As we remediate sites, as we exhume other wastes from CH True, it's our mission to get it off the site as we move forward. So also the shipping that waste serves to increase our public safety, and it does help protect water quality as we move forward. I'm going to talk a little bit more about aggregate areas, but I think, shipping waste off the site, we're getting it into a safer environment that is certified and titled landfills for it to go. But protecting water quality as well. Our aggregate areas, we're sampling, we're finding areas where we need to do cleanup. As we get those areas cleaned up, we are not allowing migration of soil and sediments with those contaminants that could be in it. We can decrease our surface water installations and stormwater installations specifically as we move forward. Once we've cleaned up a site, you may not need some of these structures to settle out the soils. It won't always be that bigger structure that Boyd had a question on earlier, but it's some of our rock check dams, other things like that. We can get the environment cleaned up and remove some of those as we go forward. We have to prove that it has been cleaned up to be able to do that, though. For the summer overview as well on cleaning up the land, we've talking about the aggregate areas. We have 5 aggregate areas that we will have performed work in this summer moving forward. I'll talk about each one of those a little bit more. Each one of these is unique. Different mission elements went on in different places of the lab through the legacy operations. So talking about our characterization with the boundaries and what we need to go in, identify those areas and identify what remediation needs to be done. Each aggregate area has different hazards we have to deal with. Each one can have different access requirements for where it's at the lab. One of Ellie's early slides was you had NNSA and Triad on one side and EMLA and N3B on the other. We're both physically located at Los Alamos. We have very different missions. Triad's mission does not stop because N3B has a cleanup project to do there. We have to coordinate with Triad, get access to their areas. They are the landlord. We are a tenant, and we need to make sure we are not affecting their mission. At times, that means we're doing our work on weekends. We're going in on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because the Triad mission will not allow us access during those periods. So we have to be flexible. as we go out there and we do that work. And we work well together. I don't want you to think it's a contentious environment. It's sometimes not easy because we do both have different missions, but we work through it and we work well together to get the work completed. We work to utilize lessons learned as we go to different sites. What worked well in one place, what didn't work well as we went forward with that. And that makes us more efficient as we're going and how we're doing our work. We have been working to change the model a little bit for how aggregate areas are performed. You'll notice Chicawee Canyon aggregate area that we're in right now, that's a phase 3 investigation report we're doing. So that means it's the third time work has been done at Chicawee Canyon. And we're going to get it done in one summer for that phase 3. And we'll do some of the remediation into next fiscal year, FY25. Some of our other aggregate areas that we're going into the first time, Starmer Upper Pajarito Canyon aggregate area, 2 Mile Canyon aggregate area, those are going to take us 2 to 3 years at times to finish because we're trying to move to a single phase approach where we mobilize once, get all the work in that aggregate area done, and leave. It means we don't have to do 3 different mobilizations, write 3 different reports as we finish that work. You're going to get a lot bigger report because we took a lot of data in that single phase, but it also means we are done and we can move to other sites. So some of those aggregate areas we have been working in. 2 Mile Canyon aggregate area is one. We completed sampling field work this summer on that aggregate area. We did have to take more samples than we planned on that one. We took almost 1,000 more samples than were originally planned. We planned right around 2,600, and we ended up with almost 3,500 samples in there. And that was because one area had some PCB contamination, and as we identified it, we had to keep stepping out and taking more samples to be able to bound that. Patrillo and Fence Canyon aggregate area is another aggregate area we were working in, and we did get samples taken in that area. It's of note, one of the other issues we can have when we're out there is cultural areas. It's been area utilized by many of the pueblos for a lot of years in the past, and some of those cultural sites are present in these areas we're working in. So we've got to look, do consultations, make sure we're preserving them. We also have National Park Service sites that we need to work within. It's through the Manhattan Project. There is artifacts over 50 years old. We need to consider whether that is something that needs preserved as well. And do those consultations in those areas. We are continuing some of our characterization in Starmer Upper Pajarito aggregate area, anticipating finishing up that investigation sampling later this summer, and as well in Chicawee Canyon aggregate area. It's, like I said, we're in the phase 3 investigation. We're sampling at multiple SHMUs and AOCs, and we'll wrap that up hopefully within the next few weeks. Lower Pajarito is the 5th aggregate area, and in the last couple months we initiated that investigation work. So working through these aggregate areas are all located either in the Southern External Boundaries campaign or in the Pajarito Watershed campaign. After we complete these, we would be looking to move to the Upper Watershed campaign. That's the work plan we've already submitted to get that work started. So lots of work going on in the aggregate areas as we highlight cleaning up the land portion of that. And it's, protecting human health and the environment. And that ultimately, like we talked, will also help with water quality protection as we get these land areas cleaned up. We do have consent order milestones that have been recently submitted and that will be ongoing as we continue. We did annually submit an interim facility-wide groundwater monitoring plan that has recently been submitted. Also, our annual progress report on chromium plume control and interim measure performance. We sample regularly at MDAL, and that is annually turn in a progress report on that, or a periodic monitoring report for that soil vapor sampling. This year, for the first time in a while, we also added in how are we doing with soil vapor extraction operations for that. So that's a system that is, it's basically a blower, but it'll operate and extract some of the volatile organic carbons out of that plume area at MDAL. And then I'd already mentioned the Phase 2 investigation work plan for S-site aggregate area that was also recently submitted. We'll be wrapping up our consent order obligations over the next 2 months, August and September. We will have some other progress reports due. We'll also have R76 well completion and initial sampling that will be due to NMED. And then the investigation report for 2 Mile Canyon will also be being submitted. So it's a busy time of year to wrap up before the end of the fiscal year as we get these, our work completed in both water programs, aggregate areas, and the CH True mission for shipping waste. So those were the updates I had. Back to you, Patricio, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Troy. Looks like we got one question here from Abby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Troy, I have a question on vapor plumes. Like, I understand what a plume is. I understand vapor. I'm having a hard time visualizing a vapor plume and how you're mitigating and cleaning it up.
So the vapor plume, as opposed to, I think that where you're at, the chromium groundwater plume, it's easier to represent that. There's an aquifer, it's in groundwater. The vapor plume is somewhere between the surface and the groundwater. It has not migrated to the groundwater. So some of these containers in our material disposal areas, like we talked about, you saw some of the drum photos in there. They could contain organics, volatile organic carbon, trichloroethylene would be one that we've looked at MDAL. And the drums have corroded over time or had ruptures and allowed that to liquid to get out of them, and it'll volatilize, and it's migrated a little bit down into the mesa. We also do groundwater monitoring around these areas. We have not seen it in the groundwater. So by drilling a well and being able to extract that vapor out, we're looking at where are the higher concentrations of the organics or tritium or something like that in that vapor plume, and how is its stability over time. Most of them we've had are really fairly stable for what we've got, and we're continuing to monitor those right now. They will be addressed, anything with the MDAs will be addressed as the corrective measures evaluations are looked at that Ellie also talked about. First, we've got to do the work plans, the investigation reports, and then we'll move into, is there any future work to be done there?
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Great. Any questions from any of our members online? Great. Seeing and hearing none. Again, thank you, Troy, for that update. It was really nice, again, being out there and being able to see that in person. It really puts things into perspective. And so I really want to thank you again for that great tour that we had a couple of months ago. We're going to move on next to a update here from EM Los Alamos Field Office Deputy Manager Ellie Gilbertson.
Thanks, Patricio. You guys get to hear from me again. Oh boy, okay. Thank you all, and I really appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on what our status is for our legacy cleanup. The presentation that Troy and I gave had a lot of information in it, so I'm actually going to kind of truncate some of that update to some of the things that have changed a little bit, but there'll be time for questions after. Before I dive in, I did want to share with you all, we do have a new field office manager. Her name is Jessica Kunkel. She comes to us from NNSA with tremendous experience in infrastructure and project management. She sends her regrets that she can't be here today. She was called to headquarters for a meeting and would love the opportunity to meet you all. And I think you are really going to enjoy working with her. She's an excellent addition to the EMLA team. And also a Los Alamos local. She was born and raised in Los Alamos, so very uniquely understands the needs of northern New Mexico from that that posture. So anyway, looking forward to introducing her with you all, and I think that'll be very positive. So really, I want to focus my update chiefly on the expert technical review. So just give you all a little bit of a background. In December of 2023, EMLA and NMED engaged with the, and I'm sorry, I have to read this because it's a mouthful, Network of National Laboratories for Environmental Management and Stewardship, NLEMS. I'm going to say NLEMS from now on. We engaged NLEMS, and we pulled experts for groundwater from academia, from industry, as well as EPA Region 6. And this group of people is performing a technical review of the difference of professional opinion, the main salient points there between the Department of Energy Environmental Management and the New Mexico Environmental Division. We jointly agreed on the expert technical review team members. I think you heard Rick mention that they picked half and we picked half, but we also mutually agreed on the other picks half. So we had say in all of the picks, both sides had that say. So the team is composed of 15 members. So this team convened in March of this year. And they have been evaluating 5 specific lines of inquiry. So the first one is the ability of the chromium mineral measure to hydraulically control the plume. DOE's posture is that the chromium mineral measure is quite successful in creating a hydraulic barrier. The second one is the state of plume modeling. So how effective is that modeling at predictive measures? How heavily can we rely on that modeling? The third one is an evaluation of NMED's proposed corrective actions and conditions, including conditional restarts. The fourth is the readiness to propose and begin evaluating remedial alternatives. And the fifth is the current concept for monitoring well design. So these 5 areas, the department and the state have a difference of technical opinion on it. We have different professional opinions. So as I mentioned before, this is a tremendous effort in reconciling those differences of professional opinion. And we have to have this reconciled, or as you saw in the previous flow diagram, we're going to have a lot of problems mutually getting cleanup done here. And that's a mutual goal for both agencies. So we're very much looking forward to this. We're anticipating that the initial report is going to be made available to EMLA and NMED in mid to late August. That's for factual accuracy. The final report we anticipate will be completed by the end of this calendar year. And it will be publicly available, but EMLA is going to work with NMED to determine the details of how that will be publicly available. But it will be publicly available in that, again, end of this calendar year. So the expert technical review is also trying to help facilitate technical discussions with EMLA and NMED so that this isn't just a let's resolve these 5 points and then be done. It's so that we can continue to work constructively together and continue to overcome differences in a professional way. As I mentioned when Beverly asked, the Department of Energy is committed to adhering to the recommendations of the expert technical review team. If they come back and tell us, gosh, Department of Energy, what were you thinking? You're completely wrong on all these fronts. You need to make all these changes. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to make all those changes. We're not too big to recognize when we've made a mistake. So I am actually really looking forward to this on a personal, professional level because I don't feel like you can grow unless you are challenged. And this is an opportunity to test ourselves and to test our understanding and to grow in that sense. So I'm looking forward to the results. I know everyone else is as well because we'll be able to resolve this kind of deadlock that we're in and begin moving forward again. So my next topic is related to chromium, and that is the NEPA environmental assessment for chromium. So NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy ACT. So again, we throw all these acronyms out all the time. If you don't recognize an acronym, do please ask, and we'll tell you, and sometimes we'll get it completely wrong because we're used to speaking in acronyms. So, but we're currently finalizing the environmental assessment that goes with the chromium interim measure and the chromium campaign. This EA, environmental assessment, that'll be available at the end of this summer, which means soon, because we're getting close to the end of the summer here. So EMLA will notify stakeholders and the public on where the EA can be accessed once that becomes available. So the final topic I wanted to share with you all is an update regarding the strategic vision. We have received a lot of inquiry about this. There's certainly a lot of interest in our strategic vision efforts. So I'd like to close by highlighting this because I consider it a success. And it centers, so the strategic vision centers on a proactive and regular engagement with the CAB, with stakeholders, with the Pueblos, and our local communities. And this effort allows us to identify what each group's core values are and what their core priorities are. And then our goal is to incorporate all of this into our prioritization and methodologies for cleanup. So it's a very important initiative that's really bringing the community into the effort, and it continues to be a priority because it does give us that important feedback. So we're currently getting Jessica brought up to speed on all aspects strategic vision, and looking forward to getting her vision and her expertise incorporated into this process. So just to recap, if you're unfamiliar with strategic vision, we do have, this has 4 phases. The first phase, which is complete, is phase 1. And this was, we hosted educational sessions for all of the constituents to provide a basic understanding of what the legacy cleanup work scope is. Just as today we talked about there's a big difference between NNSA and EM, we brought that information to the communities. Our second phase, which is also completed at this point, was listening sessions. And so while in the first phase was us doing quite a bit of talking and presentations, the second phase was us sitting back and just listening and taking notes and trying to understand the feedback that these various constituents all had. We're currently in the progress of the third phase. And this is to develop the framework for the strategic vision. We're evaluating the feedback that we received in phase 2. And just to give you a little bit of a scope there, we received over 2,000 comments from the various participants. So this was a well-engaged effort. And we're very grateful for that because we need that feedback if we're going to have that good customer service mindset of, environmental cleanup. So EMLA is committed to conducting a public session to share what's been developed and to obtain feedback on that once we kind of finalize the incorporation of all of the comments. Obviously, 2,000 comments of a technical nature, that's going to be kind of time consuming. But as soon as we have the time frame for when that public session is, public sessions rather, are going to be available, we will make sure that that is well communicated. So our fourth and final stage, which has not yet been initiated because we're still in phase 3, is that we're going to finalize this strategic vision and we'll begin rolling it out. And so this will help be an important input to decision-making on future cleanup efforts, not just current cleanup efforts. So that is where we are. And Mr. Chairman, I am happy to return the mic to you.
There you go. It looks like I muted myself. Thank you, Ellie, for that update. Looks like we got a question here from Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for Ellie. In terms of the report, when it comes out, is there an opportunity for either side to ask questions, criticize, or talk about professional fallacies within that report, or is it final and done?
When the initial, I'm assuming you're talking about the independent technical review team? report?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. When the initial report comes out, yes, both NMED and EMLA will have an opportunity to provide a factual accuracy check. So let's say that there's a statement in there that EMLA has directed that all wells must be painted pink. We can come in and say, we never provided such direction. And you know, please give us the evidence that would support your basis for that assertion. So things, I intentionally chose something absurd, but you know, things of that nature, it's not an opportunity for us to re-engage a debate with one another over, no, I'm right, here's why, now you guys are wrong too, right? Like, that's not what this is for. But there may be inputs or assumptions that were made that are factually inaccurate, and that's our opportunity.
And those are written, there's no hearing for that, correct?
Correct. The first discussion will be between the Independent Technical Review Team, NMED, and EMLA.
Thank you.
Any more questions from any of the CAB members? Looks like we have someone online. Yes, Sterling, I can hear you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Steve.
Oh, Steve. Hey, Steve, we can hear you.
Good. Ellie, I have a couple of questions, and thank you for all the information you've provided. In terms of the NEPA assessment of the chromium plume, is that intended to, or will it incorporate some assessment of potential downstream damage?
So the environmental assessments cover a very broad range of impacts that could happen to the environment. So to answer your question, I believe that would be inclusive in the EA, as well as there would be a lot of other topics in the EA. Yes. But if you mean downstream as in, it would depend on what you mean by downstream. I guess I should clarify that too. We're not going to take the assessment all the way to Carlsbad, right?
Well,
it's within reason of what the transport mechanisms would be proposed for whatever the environmental insult that's being evaluated would do. So sorry, a lot of jargon there. You know, water is going to only go so far. Air is only going to go so far for contamination. Soil is only going to go so far. And that's the kind of the umbrella that it encompasses.
But is the assumption that it would or could not reach the river, for example?
I think there would be some aspect of it that would look at that. But the EA also includes mitigative aspects. And so we currently, as you heard Troy mention, do a lot of monitoring of stormwater runoff. And we also work with other groups such as Buckman, for example, to monitor any potential contaminants that would be reaching the Rio Grande. So to answer your question, yes, asterisks.
Okay. Question number 2, you mentioned, for example, that there are other environmental management contractors operating on the site besides N3B.
Yes, sir.
Do they make presentations to the CAB from time to time? Are they within our purview?
They are within your purview. Once we get them up and running, we will bring them to the CAB.
Okay, so they're not up and running yet. Is that where we stand?
That's right. They're very close, though.
Gotcha. Lastly, I missed on your the 5 items that the technical review team is considering. I didn't catch number 1. Can you repeat that, please?
Absolutely. Give me 1 second to make sure I'm giving you the right quote. It is, number 1 is the ability of the chromium interim measure to hydraulically control the plume.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Looks like we do not have any more questions from any of the CAB members. Thank you, Ellie, for that presentation and that update. We're gonna move on to public comment period. Anybody from the public would like to make a comment? Scott, are you on today?
Yes, I'm trying to. He's really low. I can turn it up.
Okay, we're going to turn you up.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Patricio. My name is Scott Kovac, Nuclear Watch New Mexico, here in Santa Fe. Just one item kind of ongoing is that I still don't receive copies of the presentations before the monthly meetings here of the full Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. So I'm going to ask that I can get those, start getting those again. And it just makes it harder to take notes and stuff when I have to create the whole thing. Plus I could be better informed beforehand. And then as far as the chromium interim measures, NEPA goes, it looks like the NEPA is coming out first for its final. So it will not actually be able to have it will not be able to be informed by the ITR report, I guess. So I just find that interesting that the interaction between those two items, what that might be. And that's all I have today. Thanks so much, Chairman.
Thank you, Scott.
Patricio, I can, and Scott, thank you. This is Troy Thomson for your comments. And one thing to consider with the NEPA that is coming out is it is looking at potential options that can be employed for treatment at that chromium plume. And it is, part of that is there's going to be potential to use multiple options there. We know pump and treat is going to be more than likely one of the workhorses, but there's some amendments that may be used in harder to reach places and other stuff. And it's not just what's happening with the groundwater for a National Environmental Policy Act. You're looking at what are your disturbances on the surface going to be? How does that make contribute to dust in the air that may be a pollutant? You've got heavy equipment that operates. What are those pollutants? So it's really an environmental look at what would potential future operations contribute. And what type of assessment needs to be done on that? Is it an environmental assessment? Is it an environmental impact statement? So as long as the future operations stay within the bounding conditions of that NEPA, it has been analyzed. If something were to say be 3 times as large as what was analyzed, it would have to be looked at again. So it's not an end-all necessarily for that documentation, and it's been set up to give some options for what will things look like as well. I hope that helps a little bit as why it can move forward with the ITR in parallel.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Any other members from the public with the comment? Don't see any, but I do see Stephen's hand still up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Stephen. Great. Don't see any other members from the public, so we're going to go ahead and move on from items from the Executive Director, Bridget Maestas.
mic's not working.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just have a couple of updates. Our next board meeting will be September 18th at Hotel Don Fernando in Taos. For those members that live over 50 miles away, please let me know if you need a room for an overnight stay so we can get a block of rooms arranged. The next EMSSAB chairs meeting will be in Oak Ridge, September 24th through the 26th. We have Beverly Martin and Manny Lesperance who will be attending that, as well as the staff and our DDFO. Our next meeting will be November 6th at the OK Conference Center back over here in November. And in October 17th, we'll be traveling to WIP. So if you haven't already, let me know if you'll be able to attend. October 17th. Yep, we'll be traveling over on the 16th, and the tour will be on the 17th. We are also recruiting new members, members of the board and public. If you have anybody willing to serve on the board, please contact us. Let us know if you have any suggestions or anybody you would like to recommend for this board. And I think that's all I have. Thank you. Oh, also, our meeting packets. We are not allowed to send the meeting packets out to the public until after our meeting. So we will send it to the members, and then it'll also be put on our website after each meeting. It is a DOE headquarters guidance.
Great. Thank you, Bridget, for that. Any more comments or questions, concerns from any of the CAB members? So looks like we are going to give you back 45 minutes back of your afternoon, and I'll pass it back to Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for everybody that helps put this on. You guys do a really great job of pulling this all off, and I just show up and put a coat on. So thank you. So with that, I'll give you back 44 minutes. The meeting's adjourned.